The envelope is cream-colored, the kind that costs more per sheet than most people spend on a birthday card. It rests at the center of my Auntie Preethi's dining room table, the one she refinished herself 4 years ago, insisting the mahogany had earned its marks and deserved tending, not replacing. Gathered around that table are my parents, my Uncle Vikram, and an attorney named Gerald O'Shea, who drove 40 minutes from the city carrying a manila folder, a notary stamp, and a stillness that settles into the room the way January cold seeps through a window left cracked. My mother's hands rest folded in her lap. My father stares toward the window. Gerald opens the folder, and everything my family had taken as certain for 11 months begins, quietly and without warning, to unravel. My name is Debbie Subramanian. I'm a licensed structural engineer with 14 years of experience. I assess load-bearing walls, soil compaction, and foundation behavior. My work demands patience, precision, and a deep respect for what structures can and cannot carry. I mention this because it shaped the lens through which I processed everything that followed. My grandmother, Nalini Subramanian, lived 11 kilometers from my apartment, in a house that smelled of cardamom and old paper. She was 81, widowed for 2 decades, and had grown up in a 2-room home in Tamil Nadu without electricity until age 9. She and my grandfather had immigrated in 1974 with $400 and 2 suitcases, and she had spent the next 40 years doing exactly what she promised herself, making sure her children never understood hunger. My parents and Uncle Vikram accepted this as their birthright. I received it as a lesson. Every Sunday, I drove to Pati's house. I brought groceries. I sat at her kitchen table, dark mahogany, scored along one edge from a cast iron pan she'd once set down carelessly, while she made rasam from scratch, the thin, peppery broth she said was the only thing her mother had ever taught her that she'd never found a reason to improve. We ate, we talked. She told me about the neighborhood in 1981, about the garden she'd tended before her knees gave out, about my grandfather's weak jokes and even weaker singing. My parents appeared at Diwali, sometimes on her birthday. Vikram called when something was needed. Pati said to me once while we were washing dishes side by side, "The ones who take the most from you are always the ones most certain they deserve it." I didn't ask her to elaborate. I kept drying the plates. When Pati fell and fractured her hip in October, I was the one who drove her to Mercy General and sat in the waiting room for 6 hours. I spoke with Dr. Chandra about the surgical procedure, the recovery plan, and the realistic odds of full mobility. 62%, he said, for a woman of her age and condition, the way people say things when they mean it as comfort. I wrote it in my notebook. Then I wrote, "Find her the best physiotherapist within 15 kilometers." My parents arrived the following morning. My mother's first question wasn't about the surgery. It was about the house. "We should discuss arrangements," she said. "She can't be alone." "She won't be," I said. "You can't manage it yourself. You have a job." "I know what I have," I replied. That's when my mother said what she'd apparently been rehearsing since she got off the highway. "Your father and I have been talking. If Amma comes to stay with us, it makes sense to have access to her accounts, for management, for care costs." She used those words, management, care costs. 14 hours after her mother's hip surgery, and her voice carried the particular flatness of someone reciting something they've practiced in the car. I said, "Pati can speak for herself. She's 81, Devi." "And fully lucid," I said. I'd be careful about the case you're building. My mother's jaw tightened, the nearest she ever came to losing composure in a semi-public space. A family dinner was arranged the following week to discuss Amma's future. The invitation came through Vikram, who added, as if reading from a checklist, that it would be helpful if I arrived without the attitude. I remember standing at my kitchen counter, reading his message, thinking again of what Pati had said about the ones who take the most. I went because Pati asked me to, and because she asked with the particular weight of a woman who has already decided something and simply needs a witness. The dinner was at my parents' house. My mother had made biryani, the elaborate Sunday version, fragrant with whole spices, ghee, and saffron. The kind of meal that signals occasion or ownership. Pati sat at the far end in the armchair because of her hip. She ate carefully and didn't say much through the first hour. My father opened the conversation by mentioning they'd consulted a financial advisor, offered as though it were evidence, and that consolidating accounts now, while Amma was healthy enough to sign, made sense from an estate planning perspective. Healthy enough to sign, Vikram echoed, as though the thought had originated with him. Pati set down her spoon. "How much is in the accounts?" she asked. My father blinked. "That's what we'd need to look at." "I know exactly how much is in them," she said. "I'm asking whether you do." The room went quiet. My cousin Anand, Vikram's youngest, studied the tablecloth. My mother said smoothly, "Amma, this isn't about money. This is about making sure you're protected." "By whom?" Pati asked. No one answered. I said I wanted any arrangement made to be reviewed by an independent attorney. My father's voice went cold. "This is a family matter." "Then it should hold up to the scrutiny of a family attorney," I replied. That's when my father raised his voice, loud enough that Anand flinched, telling me I had always made things difficult, that I believed I was better than everyone, that Nalini had been his mother long before she became my cause, and that if I couldn't participate constructively, he would prefer I not participate at all. Pati's hands went still on the table. She looked at me, not with distress, but with confirmation. I stood up and said, "Pati, I'm leaving. You're welcome to come with me." She took 11 seconds to rise, I counted, gathered her handbag, and walked to where I stood by the door. My mother said her name, sharp as a command. Pati paused. "I'll visit," she told my mother, "when I'm invited as a guest." Anand almost said something. I watched his mouth open and close. He looked back at the tablecloth. I drove Pati home. Neither of us spoke until I pulled into her driveway. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know," I said. "I wanted to." She nodded once, the way someone files something away for safekeeping. Pati moved in with me 3 days later. She brought 2 suitcases, a box of kitchen things, and a small steel trunk, old, dark green, with a latch that required a particular sideways pressure, which she placed in the corner of the guest room without comment. I reorganized my second bathroom for her. 3 grab bars, medical grade, $47 each from the hardware supply on Fenwick, installed on a Saturday morning with my own tools. I rescheduled 2 site visits to accommodate her physiotherapy on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I drove her both ways. We listened to old Tamil film songs in the car because she loved them, and because I was learning to love them too. My parents called once in the first month. My mother said, with the careful gentleness of someone who knows they've lost ground, that they were worried about the burden on me. "I'm managing," I said. "She should be with family." "She is," I replied. The second call came from Vikram. He mentioned that Patti had valuable jewelry, that it had always been the family's understanding that it be shared equitably, and that he hoped I understood the complexity of the situation. "Put your position in writing," I said. "My attorney will respond." He didn't call again. Patti's physiotherapist was a young woman named Blessing, whose patience seemed less like a professional trait and more like a deliberate calling. By December, Patti could walk to the end of the street and back without her walker. She was quietly delighted, the way someone is when they've earned every small increment. One evening, while we cooked together, she insisting on chopping the onions because she said I held the knife like an engineer, which apparently meant incorrectly, she said, "The body remembers what it once knew. You just have to remind it." On the counter beside the onions sat the steel trunk, which she had carried downstairs that morning without explanation. Nalini Subramanian passed on a Tuesday in March, in her sleep, 9 months after coming to live with me. The cause was a stroke. She had eaten rasam the evening before, the same recipe she said she'd never improved upon, and had told me at the kitchen table, the old mahogany one I'd moved from her house at her request because she said it should be where the cooking happens, that she had done everything she'd meant to do. I didn't know then what she meant. I found out 4 weeks later when Gerald O'Shea called. He was the executor of her will. She had retained him in 2019, 3 years before her hip fracture, 3 years before the dinner, 3 years before my parents' first conversation about account access. The final amendment was dated the previous September, 6 weeks after she moved in with me. Gerald asked if I could arrange for my parents and uncle to be present for the reading. I said yes. I scheduled it for a Saturday afternoon at Patti's house, still in her name. I set the steel trunk on the mahogany table at the center of the dining room. I made tea and arranged cups because she would have wanted that. My parents and Vikram sat along one side. I sat across. Gerald sat at the head and opened his folder. The estate, he explained, comprised the house on Lakeview Terrace, valued at $340,000, 3 investment accounts totaling $218,000, opened in Nalini's name alone in 1998 and never held jointly, a savings account with $44,000, and a provident fund from her years at a textiles company, valued at $31,000. Total, $633,000. My mother said, "That can't be right." Gerald confirmed it was correct and fully documented. My father said, loud enough to carry, that those accounts were supposed to be family accounts. She had always said so. She said, Gerald replied, without any inflection at all, that the accounts were for the family. The will specifies the distribution. To Vikram, the Provident Fund, $31,000 outright. To my parents, $40,000 held in trust for documented medical expenses. The remainder, $562,000, the house and all its contents, to Devi Subramanian. With one condition: the mahogany dining table must never leave the family. My mother's voice broke. Not with grief, but with something different. The sound a structure makes when a load-bearing assumption gives way. My father's hands went still. Vikram stared at the table. His expression did the thing faces do when someone understands they are not who they believed themselves to be. I want to be precise. I did not find that moment satisfying. It looked like pain. It was pain. He was not a villain. He was a man who had told himself a particular story for 40 years and had just been handed the revision. I opened the steel trunk. Inside were letters, photographs, documents, and a single folded sheet at the top. Nalini's handwriting in Tamil, dated the previous November. Gerald had already read and notarized a translated version, but I read the Tamil aloud. Everything I have, I earned. Everything I gave was a gift, not an obligation. A gift freely given does not become a debt owed to the giver's children. Devi understood this. The table was always hers. I looked at my parents. She told me once that the ones who take the most are always the most certain they deserve it. I want you to know that she said that to me in this house, at this table, in 1997. She had already been thinking about this for a long time. That word, deserve, the one they had used for 11 months about accounts, jewelry, and arrangements, had now become the instrument of the very reading they'd just sat through. The legal proceedings took 4 months. Gerald filed in probate. My parents' attorney challenged the most recent amendment, alleging undue influence. The court requested evidence. There was none. Only documentation of Pati's 2 prior will updates, both predating my involvement, and a signed, witness statement of full mental capacity from her physician, dated the same month as the amendment. The challenge was dismissed. Before the ruling, I called my father. I told him I was willing to discuss a mediated settlement if he and my mother agreed to meet with a neutral party under specific terms. He said he would not be lectured by his own daughter about his mother's intentions. I thanked him for the clarity and told Gerald to proceed. Vikram accepted his disbursement and did not contest anything. We haven't spoken since, though Anand, his youngest, the one who almost said something at that dinner, called me 2 months later. We met for coffee. He said he'd been thinking about what had happened. He didn't say more than that. He didn't need to. I didn't sell the house on Lakeview Terrace. I rent it to a young couple, Mira and Rafiq, who are expecting their first child in August. Mira asked if she could plant marigolds along the front path. I said yes. I told her Pati would have liked that. The mahogany table is in my kitchen now. I had to shift the island 18 inches toward the window to make it fit, but it sits exactly where it belongs. The mark from the cast iron pan is still visible along one edge. On Sunday mornings, I make rasam from the recipe Pati kept on a handwritten note card, and I'm still not as good as she was. But last week, for the first time, it smelled right. She said the table should be where the cooking happens. That's where it is. Quiet dignity doesn't announce itself. It accumulates, choice by choice, year by year, through the unremarkable faithfulness of simply showing up. Sometimes it leaves something behind. Sometimes that something changes everything. If someone in your life is being quietly overlooked, call them today. Not a message, a call. Ask if you can come by. Sit at whatever table they have.